Hey everybody, today I'm going to show you how I mixed the song Crutch by the band Dead Perspective. So, just a quick background on this project. There was a gentleman who was looking for some feedback on his mix and was offering to send the tracks to other people if they wanted to take a stab at it for themselves. So that's where I got the tracks from. I have his permission to use this in the video, and hopefully this will help share some lessons and skills that you may or may not have known. So let's get right into it. So this is the original mix that he had. Let's take a listen and see if we can fix anything there, or if it would be better to, like, say this was a real client. Could you put an EQ, maybe try and fix this in mastering, or would it have to require going back into the mix and fixing some issues there? So let's take a listen. All right, so what's striking me, and yes, this was fast, is that I'm hearing the bass, some higher registers up in there that I don't like. So let's take a listen and I'll show you what I mean. Right there, that's what I was hearing. That's really ear piercing, isn't it? So I take it out and it is a lot smoother. But the problem with that is that since all of these tracks are sharing the same frequencies, we're not just taking that out of the bass. We are losing, let's see, 4.4K essentially. That's going to be cymbals, that's going to be guitar, and that's going to be vocal. So we're taking all of that out just trying to fix one problem. So we're doing a lot more harm than we are good. So based on that alone, this would require going back into the mix. So when I got the tracks, I originally got this as the drum track. This was the actual name of it. I didn't rename any tracks except for the bass and the drums that I ended up using. So I was originally sent a full drum track, which I believe he said was a superior drummer presets, possibly the gent setting. So let's take a listen and see if we can fix any problems within that. And before we play it, I want you to imagine the perfect drum mix in your minds. What does that sound like? How powerful is the kick? How heavy is the snare? And the cymbals can't be piercing. Imagine how that sounds in your head. And now let's compare it to what we have and see if we can do any EQ to make it match what we hear in our head. Well, I have something else soloed. The original mix. All right, just the drums. All right, so I'm hearing a couple things. The kick is way too consistent. So if you've never worked with programmed drums before, what you want to do is you want to go to your velocity, and these won't have it because this isn't MIDI. I bounced the audio. And it looks like I didn't save it, so my bad on that one. But the kick sounds exactly the same every single time. You want variations because that's how it sounds with a real drummer. You know, you could have the best drummer in the world and you would still hear very, very minor inconsistencies with how they play. That's called being human. And whenever you don't have that, it literally just sounds like a machine. So focus on the kick, because once you realize it sounds exactly the same, that's all you'll be able to focus on. The snare had good variations between it. He worked on that, especially during build-ups, which I appreciated. I ended up adding it to the kick on my ends. I don't think I did any adjustments on the snare. He did a really good job of that. And then I did it to the toms especially, as well as every other track. So focus on how consistent the kick is and how it sounds too perfect. And when I say too perfect, not in terms of timing, but in terms of sonically, it's the exact same thing every single time. Okay. So briefly what I did here is I tried to turn the bass down, so not the bass, I'm sorry, the kick bass drum. I tried to turn that down so it would kind of not sound as consistent as it does. And I tried to give the snare a little more body to make it sound heavier than it is by boosting the fundamental. And then what I tried to do was bring up the cymbals because those are way too quiet. Let's take a listen. So the reason that didn't work out is because you're hearing the kick, the click of it, that's being boosted within this range. So I wanted to turn the cymbals up to make them louder, make it sound like like the cymbals weren't a couple 100 feet away. And it brought up other elements with it. So that alone means I can't work with this original drum track. The individual tracks would be more helpful, or else I can't do my very best work for the clients, and that's what I want to do. So let's start with what I did with the kick. Now, what you're about to hear is the final version because I want you to ingrain this in your minds, what our goal is. Listen to this sound, and that is what we want the kick to sound like. And then we will compare it with the sounds we have and see what we can do to try and change that. Now, I've seen a lot of people play the unprocessed sounds first and then the processed ones, but I kind of like to reverse engineer it so you know what the goal in mind is. Because as mixers, even if you just started today, what's going to help you the most is not gear, is not spending thousands on the best mics. That will come on later down the road. What will help you is having a goal in mind. Because if you know what you want the final thing to sound like, then you know what you're going to have to do to get it there. So let's listen to what our goal should be. And let's listen to what we have. Okay, it's quite a bit different, but it is definitely workable, and that's good. So the first thing I did after I trimmed everything up by basically taking the excess space out, and that's something I like to do, so I know that if there's a part here, I know I'm supposed to hear guitars here, and if I don't, then there's a problem, and that's a visual thing I like to do. So I asked him, do you want to use the drum sound you sent me? Or are you okay if I add my own samples that I'm more familiar with? And he said, yeah, you can use your own. So that's what I did. So here's And these aren't my own samples that I've personally recorded. These aren't that. So let's listen to the kick on its own and see what we can do. Now, initially that sounds like a good kick. And it is. There's nothing wrong with that on its own. But what we have to think about is how everything is going to work together. So let's listen to what my goal was for this and then compare it to what we have. So immediately, what are the differences? That we hear more of the click in the higher end of the spectrum, and some lower mids got removed. So in the EQ, that's exactly what happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the track with the EQ off, and then I'm going to boost every frequency I cut so you can hear what I heard. And then I'm going to cut every frequency that was boosted so you can hear what I wanted to add more of. So let's start with it off. So that's what we did there. And then what I added next was a dynamic EQ. Now, if you've heard of the FabFilter series of plugins, specifically the Pro MB, this is something that does something very similar. It's a dynamic EQ, and the TDR Nova is actually free, this version of it. So Google TDR Nova, and that'll help you immediately get that started, especially if FabFilter is a bit out of the budget, which, you know, is very, very likely. It definitely was for me for starting out. So what I'm doing here is I'm using it to press down on the lower frequencies. So whenever the lower frequencies kick up, especially during fast double bass parts, the more you'll see this move down. Because when a sample is being triggered, it has the exact same frequency characteristics 100% of the time. And the only thing that would really change about that is the velocity in which it's being played. So I do have variations in the kick. So if you listen right now, the kick is not the exact same hit over and over. Some are going to sound louder, some are going to sound quieter, just like it would with the real drummer. Let's listen. So right there. If you didn't hear that, I encourage you to watch this push down, because the louder something is, the more bass is going to be in the signal, especially with this kick. So we're using that to control it. And this is especially vital whenever there are some fast double bass parts right here specifically. Because you have, is it 3 or 4? 4. So we have 4 kicks within the span of a very quick time, and that low end is going to build up. So what we're doing, watch the yellow line push down on the lower frequencies. So I'm using that to control it, because what I wanted to do next is make it as even sounding as possible, so that way I could change kind of the overall dynamics with a compressor, because I don't want low end triggering the compressor first. All right, so this was to get rid of the stuff I didn't want, boost some of the stuff I did want. And then I don't want to get rid of the frequencies around here, because that's where all of the bass is. That's where the fundamental of the kick is. It's within that range. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't overriding anything else, because if that's louder than everything else, then it's going to trigger the compressor first. So here's an extreme example of what I was trying to avoid. Do you see how the bass is so much higher than anything else? How the bass is so much higher than anything else? That's what I don't want, because that would trigger the compressor first, and then you're compressing all of the low ends, and then the high end doesn't get touched. So that's what this is doing. This is compressing the low end, so that way it's a little more even with the high end. And we can kind of see it. So now what it's going to do is the compressor doesn't have to work as hard to get the low end under control, and can affect the entire thing through its own settings. So let's hear what the compressor adds. It's going to brighten everything up because the output is a little higher. So let's listen. So notice how the compressor is being used sort of like an EQ. And you can do that with compressors. They're not just for getting an overall even level. That's kind of what we already have, because we're using samples. But I'm using a compressor as EQ. So notice how it's changing the higher ends of the kick, specifically the click you hear when it's off versus on. Let's take a listen. It's definitely adding something I like, and my goal was to reduce it by 3 decibels because I don't want to smash the life out of it. Let's take a listen and see what that would sound like. Oh, look, we are getting some reverb out of that. Listen. You know, let me find a single kick section, because that's something I didn't experiment with. Because there is reverb in the sample library I was using, but now we are actually hearing that. I'm learning something from this. Wow. So we could smash it. It would work. But I'm using this to enhance it, not necessarily take stuff away. And then the last thing I did was, because this tamed a lot of the low end, I wanted to add some of it back with Submarine. Now, disclaimer, this is not how I would EQ this kick today, but this is what I did at the time. So this is basically just adds some subs to it. So I'll turn it off and on, and then it's off right now, but you'll be able to hear the difference, provided you're using good headphones or speakers. And if you have speakers, you definitely hear that. But the reason I only boosted it by a decibel is because it helped blend in with the kick. and it wasn't overtaking everything else, because if I boosted it too much, that's exactly what it started to do. It drew attention to itself, and that wasn't the goal for it. So let's turn the effects off and see just how far we've come from what our goal was. That's a big difference. And now let's go to the kick room. And if you have any drum samples where you have the option to use room samples, do it, because it will give you so much more versatility of things you can do. And before I'm done going through the drums, I'll mute all the rooms and show you exactly what they add, and we'll be able to hear a difference. So this is the goal for the room. And this is what we have to work with. So what we want to do, especially with the kick room, is we want to make it sound like there's a room. Because anytime you record drums, the environment is going to have an effect. And we want to be able to kind of paint a picture of where this performance is taking place. So let's start with a compressor. And the kick and the kick room are going to have the exact same velocities, so there won't be any variations there. So if I remember right, the first thing I wanted to do was smash the ever-loving daylights out of it with a compressor, just to really kind of pin it in its place and bring some of the room out, like you heard with the compressor right here. How when we really smashed it, we ended up hearing reverb that was baked in. And that I really want to bring out. So let's see if we did that. We did not. And that's okay. This is kind of just making it more even. We're only compressing by just over a decibel, and that's really not bad. We don't really need to smash it. We could if we wanted to, but because this is a room sample, then I just didn't feel a need to do that. So then the next thing is EQ. So before I show you what I did with the EQ, listen to the track and figure out what you would do, because you have the goal in your mind. Figure out what you would do. You know, just because I EQ'd it this way doesn't mean I would EQ the same thing again this way, like I said before. So tell me what you hear, and then let's go from there. So what I noticed is that kind of how we removed some of the boxiness from the kick, I'm hearing it in the kick room too. And it looks like that's what we did right here. So kind of the same thing. Turn the plugin on and off, and then I'll boost everything that was cut and cut everything that was boosted so you hear what I heard. So it is some extreme EQ. So the first thing I heard, and the biggest difference you'll hear, was this, right? Not that. Wow. Is this right here, scooping the boxiness out. And then when I did, I heard this pop up. And that tells me that these frequencies here were covering up this one. And because this is such a big cut, I boosted a little bit here just to kind of bring back some of the low end, in hopes that it would merge with the submarine plugin I have on the kick also. And then this frequency was just annoying also, because when I boosted the high end right here, I noticed that it brought that with it, so I wanted to keep that down. And then I did a final EQ. So same test again. Tell me what you hear and what you would change. I'll turn that back on so you could hear it. I forgot that's why I left it like that. It still sounds boxy to me. So yep, it looks like that's what I did. Remove some more boxiness, and well, you should know the drill by now. So that is the kick room. So we have our kick room, and let's compare it to what we had. Big difference. And now let's compare it. Well, not compare it. Let's put it with the kick and then compare both of those. See, you hear all the low ends immediately. You hear all the boxiness we cut return. And that's why I like to start with the goal, because we know what a perfect kick drum sounds like in our minds. And now that we compare it to what we have, now we're hearing all the problems that we took out much more clearly. It's kind of a hindsight thing. And then the final thing is I'm sending both of those to a kick bus. I could have named this kick bus, but this reminds me of the function of it. So if I wasn't happy with the final sounds, this is where I would apply more EQ, compression, basically anything. But the end result is to add reverb to it. So let's hear what that does. So the reverb is meant to be super, super, super subtle. Alright, it's supposed to paint the idea of a room in addition to the kick room. Because now we have both of these, a kick and a kick room. That's the environments of the kick, but the snare may not have been recorded in the same environment with the sample. So that's the trick here, is to make these, the kick, the snare, the toms sound like they were all recorded in the same room. Because with samples, I don't know if they were or not, because I wasn't the one who did it. But this is just more of a control thing where we can make sure that this is as close to perfection as we can get. So let's listen to the final thing, and then without any effects. So that is our final kick. And then kind of a quick thing with the routing. The kicks through sends, go to the kick reverb. Same thing with the snares, same thing for the toms. And then all of these go to the shells bus. And then the shells bus gets sent to the drum bus. And then the cymbals, I actually just is an actual bus. I'm not doing this through sends at all because I didn't need the additional volume in the cymbals. So let's go to the snare real fast. Let's hear what the goal for the snare should sound like. Okay, so what do we have to work with then? So don't even pay attention to the plugins. Just close your eyes and listen with your ears. How big of a difference is there between the goal and the sounds? So close your eyes. I'm not going to tell you whether it's on or off, and just listen. All right, so let's take a look at what we ended up doing. Let's listen to the actual snare. Actually effects first. So from my ear, it sounds like really just compression and a volume boost. All right, now obviously there's an EQ going on, but based upon just what I heard, that's what it sounded like. So let's take a look at the EQ. Yeah, that's not a lot of difference. So what I did was I cut the snare because just removing unwanted low end here will help it get along with the kick. And then kind of like I tried to do with the full drum mix that I was originally sent, I boosted the fundamental just a little bit so it would sound a little heavier. So it's a very focused frequency, but a subtle boost blended in with everything else, and that's why I rose everything else. I could have just done the gain, but I like to see it visually. And then this must have been an annoying frequency I heard. Either that or it conflicted with the kick. Let's take a listen. Nope, it was an annoying frequency. So that's really all that was being done. That's all I heard. Now, again, for a disclaimer, this is not how I would go about dealing with the snare today. This is just what I did at the time. And then I put it in the CLA 76, the bluey setting. And kind of before I get into that, if you're new to mixing, recording, or anything audio, and you see all of the fancy plugins, don't think that that's gonna help your mixing skills. Because gear does have its role, but at the end of the day, it's up to you to figure out the goal and then find the appropriate tools to get to that goal. So like you see right here, this is the stock EQ for this audio software. It's PreSonus Studio One. Now, if I really wanted to, I could have put FabFilter on it. I could have. But I didn't have FabFilter at the time, so I didn't. This is what I had to work with. This is what I used to build up my ear, because FabFilter and other paid plugins are great. They are. They can help you do the job faster, but only if you know what you're trying to do. Like you could grab the what actually let's do this real fast. Let's just see where this takes us. Let's say that I just want to use the frequency analyzer and pull down everything that pings up. And we say, yeah, that's too loud. So is that. There was one there. Oh well. Okay, now let's compare it. So just like that, we just ruined the snare for the client. All right, these tools are helpful, but only if you know how to use them. I used the frequency analyzer just because I could. All right, but that doesn't tell me what else the track is going to face. All right, and yes, there is a feature where if you have multiple FabFilter EQs on different tracks, you can link them up together and it will show you problem areas. But software doesn't tell you everything. All right, if it could, there wouldn't be need for audio engineers. There just wouldn't. So right here, this was boosting. That's the fundamental of the snare, which we boosted 201 versus 194. And I guarantee frequency 201 is in here. Yep. So we knocked out the fundamental just by going off that one tool. Don't do that, because it's not going to help you learn, and you're going to forget about the goal. And like, don't just use these tools because you can. That's not what they're for. They're there to help your efficiency. All right, so back to this compressor. We have a bluey setting and a blacky setting. If you don't know the difference between what these sound like or what these do, don't get this plugin yet. All right, you should get these paid plugins if you're ready. You need to have a need for it. All right, yes, it looks cool. Yes, you can load up your DAW and it'll say, oh, 300 plus plugins, and that may be impressive. But if you only use a handful, that tells you what you need to know. All right, you can have your go-to EQ, you can have certain compressors for everything, but like it's a contest for nothing. Like, having the most plugins won't make you the best engineer. Don't waste your money. Invest it in knowledge, because that will get you so much further than accumulating stuff like this and not knowing how to use it properly. Okay, rant's over. So I used the bluey setting because that one is more transient heavy than this one. So let's take a listen. Well, let's turn it on, yeah? Do you hear how this one brought out the reverb, even though they have the exact same settings between them? That's what I'm talking about during that rant. That there are these subtle things within these plugins, and most of them are hidden in the manuals. Read the manuals. You might find something useful that nobody else may have known. Like, if you don't know if 1 or 7 is the fastest, that confused me for the longest time. And then I chose to remember it like it was a speedometer, 1 all the way up to 7. So 7, like, that's how I tell them apart. So let's listen. So it's boosting things, and I went with a slow attack and a fast release. So this lets the transient through, and this immediately clamps down after. And then after that, I went with a JST clip for saturation as well as to boost the volume a bit. Because saturation is a completely different animal than just a gain knob. You're adding extra harmonics to enrich the sounds. And if you don't know or haven't experimented with saturation, this is a plugin called Head Crusher. This is free also. It's by a company named Audio Assaults. Head Crusher free. And that is a great way to experiment with saturation. And I use a paid plugin for saturation. I did the research. I know how to use it. But this is where I got my start on it. So now you have 2 free plugins you can download off this alone. The TDR Nova instead of the FabFilter Pro MB. Okay. And now you have the Head Crusher instead of Saturn. All right. Both add saturation. Both do it differently. And when you find out what those differences are, whether it's through a YouTube video or experimentation, then you're ready to, I don't want people spending their hard-earned money on stuff they're not ready for. Because it's like being in school, majoring in business and then attending in engineering graduate school. There's going to be a lot of disconnects, and it's a building process. I got this DAW back in 2016. That's when I first started recording. And today it is September 2020. This wasn't built up in a day. You have to be bad before you're good. That's a universal life lesson. So, JST clip. So volume boost, and we are essentially taking what the characteristics the compressor is adding. But the reason I chose JST clip in addition to the saturation is because listen what happens if we just boost it. We're overloading it. And I don't want clipping between plugins because that's going to add distortion and alter the sound in a way I don't want. So the snare with and without effects. All right, let's go to the snare room and see what our goals should be. All right, so there's some stuff we can do. Yeah, this one was just notching frequencies that I heard. And then bringing it up with a compressor also. Just 4 more even sounds. And then the snare reverb, again, it's a combination of these two. So this is what's being sent, what that bus is going to sound like before effects. Oh, I forgot to turn that down, didn't I? Okay. So the fundamental that I boosted is kind of overtaking. So the reverb is going to smooth that out. So let's listen without these. No, it really didn't actually. So what you can do is actually EQ the reverb. That's a thing you can do. So that's exactly what I did here. Is I kind of limited where the reverb could go. So we're getting it out of the way of the kick as well as anything that'll be up here. And then that, let's listen. Yeah, that did something to kind of reduce it. Let's listen. It actually really didn't. Okay, well let's how about we narrow the wait, that can only go to okay. Well, I'll match that 24 then. Well, amateur mistake right there. Let's solo the channel so we can hear what's happening. So see that's why you build up your lessons, because I wasn't hearing a difference and it turns out that channel was muted. That can still happen, you know, just keep that in mind. And then I put another compressor, so now the reverb is controlled and we're compressing the reverb. And it's just very slightly. And the reason for that is it's because whenever there are drum rolls or very fast snare hits, like right here will probably be one where it'll spike up. Yeah, so it's to help control that. So there we have our kick and our snare. Now let's go on to toms. Let's see if we can find a rack tom. All right. The first thing I did is I put an EQ. And this is a kind of a character EQ. This sounds different from the stock EQ that I used, and I liked how this one sounded on toms, so I used it. So the high pass, kind of like this function by rolling off lower frequencies. That's what I did up here. So I rolled it off to 67 hertz to ensure that it's out of the way of the subs, or at least the very, very low subs. I boosted some 10K as well as some 4K. And notice these are very subtle boosts. Very, very subtle. And then I took away some, a little bit under 1K. And then added quite a bit of bottom ends. There's some compression going on as well, in addition to a gates. Now, the importance of the gate with toms is so, well, just listen, because it'll change how fast they fade out. And then what I did is I added the CLA to compress it and kind of bring the whole thing together. Well, bring the whole thing together, make it more even sounding. And I didn't want it transient heavy, which is why I didn't use this one. I used more of a, yeah, like the goal was overall, an overall even sounding level, as opposed to something really transient heavy like I wanted the snare to be. Because the snare, I want to cut through everything. The toms, I don't. I want them to be heard. and have a good general level, because those have a longer sustain at the end. Right here. Not there. Like right here, you can see that. And same with the floor tom also. So with the rack and the floor tom, I've learned to never EQ those exactly the same. Now that could be said about a lot of sources, but with toms, you can get away with, well, at least with samples, most of the time you can get away with dragging over the same settings. But they're going to sound different, so there are slight differences with the EQ in terms of the frequencies being taken away. Or there aren't. Oh, wait, no, it's right here. The amount of 4K I boosted here. That's the difference. And then the CLA again. And I believe it's the exact same settings I used for the other tom. Nope. The release is a little quicker for the floor. Just to kind of get it out of the way since it has longer sustain. And then the tom room. Just a compressor. And then some EQ to get stuff that was poking out. So that's what that did. And then the reverb. And that's another thing with the rooms. Use the same reverb setting so it sounds consistent. Well, not with the rooms, but with the actual buses. Use the exact same reverb settings. You can always alter the reverb after, but use the same settings so it sounds like it was done in the same room. And then I have a gate because the reverb, like we had a gate on the actual channels to kind of make for a smooth release. And with reverb, we are definitely altering that. So I put an additional gate so that's not the case. And then creating a barrier around the reverb again. And then a compressor to make sure the reverb doesn't get out of control. Well, it's not doing anything. It must have been during a faster part. Or I guess I just had it set poorly and didn't realize it. Oh wait, I boosted the tom room so it would show. Oh, nope, the channel was muted again. How about that? Alright, let's go through again. So smoother release there, creating a barrier around it, and then the compressor. Yeah, there we go. So now our shells are done and they all go to this drum bus with compression on it. So let's listen to what that sounds like. so I'm boosting about 3 decibels a gain, and this will barely touch anything where it gets too fast. Crazy double kicks, a lot of snare. There we go. Then on to cymbals. The hi-hats. Well. I'm brightening it up a little bit. And then this is getting it out of the way of the kick and snare. So that way frequencies aren't competing. And then we have a ride. And that was just a little bit of EQ. To brighten it up. And then the crashes. Let's see if we can, preferably where they both hit at the same time. Basically what we did. Some SSO, because I like the character of this. And then this was taking out frequencies that were piercing, so we'll solo the right channel and we'll see what they sounded like. It's not going to sound pretty. Now one more. And then the left. Originally, I kind of like Tom's, I copy and pasted the same EQ settings, but then these weren't as annoying. It was just this one in that case. And then we have the rooms for the crashes, which I just rolled off the low stuff so it's not competing with snare at 200 or the kick down there. So you're not going to hear much of a difference there, and that's okay. We're just getting rid of frequencies that we don't need. And then the cymbal room, this is going to be all of these in one. Not through buses or anything, but this was an option with the samples I had. So rolling off frequencies again. And then brightening it up just a little bit is what it sounded like. Yeah, it brightened it up, but okay, so it looks like a more extreme roll off. Let's see, 263 versus 248. Now, this is what I mean by character EQs. These are the gain knobs. 0, 0, 0. Yet it sounds brighter. Do you hear what I mean by that? I'm not boosting anything. All right, really the only thing going on here is the compressor, and that's really all it's doing. But see, this is a perfect example how compressors can act as EQ. Something so subtle like that. And then that is our almost our drum set. For the cymbals bus, I don't have soothe yet, so I'm using a de-esser. Now, think of when I said you build up. I'm still in the process of building up. And for now, I'm using a de-esser in place of soothe. Well, not that set. But listen to what it's taking out. Now, it doesn't sound like much when I bypass the plugin, but I'll tell you, in the car test, that is a lifesaver. It truly is. And then on the drum bus, this is where I treated the drums as one. I rolled off the extreme low ends, and then there was a frequency that I didn't like. So let's, well, I'm not actually gonna have to, there we go. And then a compressor. And the attack and release here are very quick settings. So it's meant to smash the transients. Well, not smash, but control them that we brought out with all the other stuff. So this is our final drum sounds. Oh, that's why the compressor wasn't working. Those were muted. So I'll go back. So barely touching it. So our not perfect drums, our drum goal versus what we had. All right, so now we are going to go on to bass, and we're going to mute the drums for now. Now with bass, there are two options. You could just, like, I was sent one bass track, and I renamed these two because I do a technique called splitting the bass. And especially with heavy music, what I like to do, and I'll pull up the multiband real fast, is I view the spectrum like this. I want to have the low ends of the electric guitars wherever they may be. Now that it's not going to be that high, but just as an example, let's say it's 100 hertz or so. What we can do is have the bass sub. So when I say sub and grit, we're taking the same bass track and we're duplicating them so we're exactly the same. And then we're going to EQ them so they each take up a specific frequency. Kind of like with the cymbals, how we dumped everything under 250 hertz. We're doing the exact same thing here so we can control the entire bass sounds with more than one fader. So I'm envisioning the low end of the bass to occupy below the guitar sound but support it a little bit, and then the rest of the bass supporting the rest of the guitars, but everything is going to overlap through the low end of the guitars. But this way the bass isn't overtaking those and it's not overtaking anything else. So this is the goal right here. The lowest part of the bass, the low end of the guitars where there's some bass, but you hear the low ends more clearly, and then the bass supports the rest of the guitars throughout the rest of this spectrum. So let's create the sub first. So here's the original bass track. So I'm hearing a lot of problems there, but we're not going to have to worry about 90% of them because this is the sub track. That will come into play when we work with the grits. So when I did get the FabFilter plugin, then this is what I reduced it to. Now, I'm going to be silent for a bit because this is going to be tough if you're listening on a phone. But if that's what you choose to do, turn the volume up extremely loud because you're basically going to see if your phone can pick up the range of 35 to 89 hertz. And then this little dip right here, I dipped out because that was the fundamental of the kick. So by taking that out of the bass, I'm ensuring that I won't have to do any side chaining, and it's a good starting point to avoid problems between the kick and the bass. So let's listen. It's a tough thing to hear. And then I put on Saturn to add distortion. And the reason I use Saturn is because Head Crusher didn't achieve the same effects. So again, that's the advantage of paid plugins versus free ones, but we all have to start somewhere. And because this one has a bunch of different saturation settings where Head Crusher only has one. So let's listen to what Saturn added. Now, that added a lot of subharmonics. Let's look at the graph. This is our range, and look how far this line extends after we saturate it. All the way to here. To, what is this number? 2.1K. Can I delete this? No. Well, looks like I can't delete that, so let's just load it up again. And what did I use? A warm tube. So then let's just remove that one. So that's super saturated. Oh, well, everything else is on. But our range also got extended. So the cut we made here, it's staying here, but now it's going all the way out here. So we need to do pretty much the same cut again. And now it's going to be the same thing as this, but a lot more harmonics in here. Now my speakers, my monitors are at quite a low volume, but every note is defined in there within that range. And the theory was if I notched the kick fundamental out of it, not too many harmonics would overflow. You know, some will take up this range, that's part of it, but it's avoiding problems if you can, is what that was. Oh, so actually that went far. That went a lot further than I thought, actually. Holy crap. And then I added a character EQ called Pull Tech from Waves, and this EQ adds saturation also. So I'm going to remove the setting I did and listen to what it does without really any of the knobs turned at all. If you can't hear it, I'll turn it up. I mean, it just makes it a lot more defined. So I did a boost at just 1, just because I wanted a little bit more low ends, and I did it at 100 hertz because I want that to cut through on most speakers and kind of act as a bonding point for when I do some master bus processing. And then after that, TDR Nova to control it. So that's what's being taken out. So that is our sub. Now the grits, this is where we're going to have to deal with the problems. Like the finger noise that we heard in the original mix. So the other thing I forgot to mention before I determined where to make the sub cuts is the lowest I like to take everything is at 35 hertz. That's, anything left down here, I reserve that for bass drops or anything else, because very rarely will I hear that in a car test. And I have done this, soloed it, and seen how far I can go down. And it's just, at least in the cars that I've tested music on, it's not as vital as 35 hertz or above. So that's where I make my low cut. And then I went to the guitars and I found that their low end, I could push it up to 85 hertz without it affecting the sounds. So 85 hertz, the sub should end right around there, so there can be a little bit of a crossover right here. And I ended it at 89, and the guitar is at 85. So there's going to be a little bit of overlap, and that's okay. So 89, and then with the grits, 119. And 89, just to show you, would be right there. So we have a little bit of overlap too, and a little bit of overlap between the bass, which was at, what was it at? 89? Okay. Not the guitars, the bass grits. So that's where the sub would be. And then, yeah, so this way we're structurally eliminating frequencies. So now we know the bass grits won't compete with the kick. The sub, it will, but we notched out a frequency, so that will help prevent more problems. We may have to bring up the click, but for now, this is more preventative. So let's turn the EQ off and see what high passing and low passing did for us. All right, we can't do it that way, so let's do it this way. So that's what we're taking out. just that little bits cleans it up so much, and that's going to become really apparent near the ends where you hear a lot of, I'm not sure if it's, I've said finger noise, but it could be the pick. I'm not sure what it is. But the next thing I did is I boosted some 1.5K because that helps bring out the definition of the notes. Now, obviously, this is too much. So, wait, listen to the difference if I bring it from here all the way down, and then I'm going to undo it and listen to how much clarity you can hear in the notes. So memorize that also, because that's a good thing to know. And then the finger or pick noise, I took that out. So let's listen. Right here. That. So that is the bass grits. And then at the same time, you know, the sub is a super, super, super subtle thing that we blended in with the grits. And then the final thing was just a compressor. Just to kind of not necessarily pin it in its place, but get a more, this was for a level one. Because if I wanted to pin the low end in its place, I would have gone with the fastest attack and the slowest release. But we've done that with the TDR Nova, so this is more just volume control. So the drums with the bass. And when I mix this isn't the fader balance I ended up at. What I do is I get a sound I like. I'll get the final sound with the drums first, because that covers basically the whole spectrum from the kick all the way to the cymbals. But I'll get a sound I like with the bass. I'll EQ the guitars. And then I'll adjust the balance once I'm happy with both of them sonically. So with the guitars, we found out this is where the low ends begins of the guitars. And then it was about rolling off some high end and then notching any frequencies that stuck out, which in this case was 4K. So what I'm going to do is because the rhythm guitars were identical sonically, but they were different takes. So really it was just about limiting. So it would limiting where, what the heck am I trying to say? It's about limiting the range so nothing got out of control, so it wouldn't interfere with the kick. There is potential for it to interfere with the snare, because that's at 200 hertz or so, as well as the toms, as well as other things. So we have to keep that in mind. So let's hear what the guitars sounded like on their own. I forgot to mute the guitar bus over here. I apologize. So, and I'm actually going to go to the chorus, because sustained notes are easier to find problems in. So really not a huge difference. I'll put the mix in mono for a second. There was just a 4K thing that I didn't like. So that's all that I felt I needed to do there. Because another good lesson is that if it sounds good, it is good. So like same thing with the bass. The only problem was that was basically the noise up here, and then I wanted to make it more defined. I didn't feel the need to do all of this fancy stuff like I had to with some of the drums because it was close enough to what I needed to support the guitars. Now let's move on to the guitar verses. Now, hopefully you didn't see what effects I applied yet, because I want you to listen to what I got and see if you notice something. So with those, and these are effects off, by the way, one of these was sent to me with reverb, and the other wasn't. So right there, based on the labeling and the fact that these are all stereo tracks, I think the intention was to have harmonized guitars. So that's what I did. I added reverb to this one. Now, I was unable to match the reverb, but I did what I could because I ended up pinning these hard left and hard right lefts. So this way, the kick and snare are in the center of the picture. The bass is in the center also. This way the guitars don't interfere with the bass, and then the vocals go over everything. And then after that, reverb, what I should have done was a limit to where the reverb could go and then notch any frequencies. And it looks like that's what I did. So let's listen without. So let's hear what this one was. Okay, so this right here is just a bunch of dead air, it sounds like, caused by the reverb. Like, I don't even hear any note definition, so even though this looks weird to just take out frequencies there, it didn't affect the sounds. And that's another thing with audio. There aren't any hard rules necessarily. All right, there are just general techniques that have worked for a lot of people. And the one that's worked for everyone, even all professionals, and I can say this with the facts, as a fact with 100% confidence, is that all the professionals use their ears. All right, so what if we just use the spectrum for this? Because if you're not ready to have a fab filter, you haven't necessarily discovered what your goal is for a certain sound and how you want to shape it. How would the result be different if this was used as a crutch? Let's see. So right there, that removes the fundamental notes. All right, that's why you don't use your ear. Or presets for that matter. And this is a whole other personal rant of mine. Is that I was told for the longest time, use your ear, and presets ended up giving me a different result between turning the plugin on and off, the bypass, and therefore I thought it sounded better. No, I had to learn the hard way to use your ear, and anyone who's a beginner, that's the best advice I can give if you're starting off. Develop those skills. Because again, these tools are great, but not if you don't know how to use them. They're not like, this won't substitute if you don't have the ear for what you're looking for. All right, they're there to help you. So if you hear something, you're like, I'm hearing a high pitch frequency, and you know to look from, let's just say, an absolute beginner, at least at this half, and you know what's going to be here, then immediately you can narrow it down. Because some people are more advanced than I am, to the point where it's almost like perfect pitch. They're like, oh, there's a lot of 10K in this guitar tone. That's something I hope to develop one day. But at this point, what helps me is just going around and sweeping. And I don't even use the listen button for that. So if I hear something in a source, I'll pinpoint it, try and listen, ingrain it in my brain what it sounds like, and then sweep through until I find it. And then I take it out, bypass, and then see if it returns. I really hope that didn't just take out the EQ. It did not, okay. And then for the one that had reverb on it, more dead air, and then 4K thing. So let's compare the EQs real fast. 527 hertz, 637. So again, using the ear alone, now let's see, 4091, 4028. So my ear wasn't exactly accurate in terms of finding the exact same frequencies, but look at how close these are. All right, this is why you use your ear, because I didn't drag this over and then move it. If I had dragged it over, I guarantee you I would have left it, because that's just what I would have done. But now the guitar verses sound like this. I really wish I could have matched the reverbs, but this is what I was given, and that's kind of what it was. So then the guitar bridge, it sounded like the exact same tone as the guitar rhythms. So I believe I would have just dragged that over, and it looks like I did for both, and it ended up working. 4.81, 4. All right, I might have changed it just a little bit, but I can tell you the way I do it now, I would have dragged it over as a starting point. And it looks like I just changed a little bit. And then this guitar lead, this was the fun part. If I can solo it. I guess not. Okay. So the first thing I would have done is find out the range to see if it's going to interfere. Well, not if, it's going to see what frequencies is going to interfere with the rhythm guitars. So because it's a higher register that he's playing in, it's going to be higher than 85, I promise you that. but this range, it'll probably be higher than 8K also. So let's see. Okay, 188s. And nope, it was actually the same. But what I did is it's a 24 decibel octave drop versus, oh no, it's 24 also. That's, it didn't look like it. That, let's see, 30. Okay, so I'm at a 12 setting right there. So let's match that so it looks the same. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So this is the range of the guitar. So if anything, this cut some fizz outs from the high end. Let's listen. Oh yeah, most definitely it did. So the low end. And I remember going back and forth with where I positioned this. And the result at the end of the day was that it sounded good here. And I had this number in my mind from where the rhythm guitars ended. And I didn't necessarily want the lead to interfere with the cymbals, which it definitely is at 8K for sure. But it's nice to kind of have all the guitars at the same ending points. But we can move it around and see what that would have done. So that's where I ended up putting it. And then yeah, I wanted to make it brighter because it's a little dark in my opinion. Which again that's because I have the goal of the sound I want to create with this. So yep, right here, boosting some stuff. So let's listen. And then the volume drop comes here because when I was adding stuff, it was overloading the plugin and causing some unwanted artifacts as a result. So I dropped it in volume, and then I compressed the entire thing and brought it up just a little bit. Because even though electric guitars are super compressed already, it was more of a pitch frequency thing, if that makes sense. Because if you think of a bass player, some notes are just going to sound lower and more out of control than others. That's just part of it. So I really wanted to just pin this in its place and make sure that it was controlled, it was a solid thing, and it wasn't as dynamic. Because I gave it the range it needed. I eliminated unwanted fizz so the compressor wouldn't boost that. I added some higher stuff to make it more defined, and this is just a matter of pinning it in its place. Alright, the guitar bus. This is where things get fun. So let's listen to all of the guitars right now as they are. So there's definitely stuff we can do. Mainly the rhythms. This is where I use Saturn. Because Saturn, so I'm choosing where I wanted to add saturation. So listen to what this does for the tone. It brightens it up just a little bits. Now, we can go crazy, But again, I liked how the guitar sound was, so I chose not to. Then I added an EQ, kind of reinforced the limiting of the low end, and I increased the high end a little bit because Saturn is going to add some extra harmonics as we saw earlier. And then, okay, what was that 201? Do you remember? The snare. So I heard that the guitars were kind of overtaking the snare, and instead of turning the snare up, I chose to take that frequency out of the guitar. And we can hear that isn't a vital part of the guitar sounds at 200, and this is why it's notched so narrowly, because if we didn't do that, let's listen. Yeah, we're hearing notes in what we're taking out, and that is what we do not want. And then I would have added the Pultec EQ, and I boosted it at a 10K by 1 decibel to make it a little brighter, and then at 100 hertz also. This way, it helps connect it with the bass sub. Now, even though we made a cut here at 118, think of it like we're doing this. If we can go to 100. So there's going to be a little gap here, and that's where the sub and the bass grits will overlap. And then we're going to hear some guitars here provided by additional saturation through this plugin. And then lastly, a compressor just to catch chugs, basically, especially during the breakdown, whereas the bridge. Because palm mutes definitely spike the signal, and what I could have done is use the TDR Nova to control it, but this wasn't the most high gain guitar sound, so I didn't feel the need to do that. And then the bass bus and the guitar bus both go to the glue bus. And this is something I made up by, so basically this is a single compressor that's going to compress the bass and guitars on their own. I'm sorry, not on their own, together in one channel. This way the bass doesn't overtake the guitars and the guitars don't overtake the bass. So if one's louder than the other, the compressor will kick in. And then the glue bus gets sent to the instrument bus. And the instrument bus is composed of the glue bus, so guitar and bass, as well as the drum bus is being sent there also, with an additional compressor. So let's mute the... Actually, I'm done showing this off, so I'm going to make it inactive. So this way we don't hear it, as well as the original mix. Oh, we're not quite into vocals yet. And you'll notice I'm just barely moving the needle on these compressors. And I'll move the needle with extreme compression to show you why. Does anyone know why we're not hearing that? It's because I should solo this. The drums go away. Oh no, they were just muted. But this is really just to, even though we can't hear it, it's to make sure that if we were to bounce all of the instruments in one track, that it's all one consistent level. That's what it's for. Without any effects. And with, so already this is good, and let's see what level we're at. Alright, -16 isn't bad. So this is another free plugin called the Ulean Loudness Meter. Hopefully that's the correct pronunciation. This is free, and it'll give you a measurement in LUFS. Now, if you plan to release music on Spotify, they require a reading of -14 integrated, meaning an overall level across the entire song. So the fact that we are at -16, and let's say our goal is -14, we're 2 decibels below it before adding vocals. That's fantastic. So now that the instruments are done, this is where I would do some pre-master processing. So if you look right here, the reason I'm doing sends to different buses instead of grouping them like I did with the cymbals is because all of these are going to the pre-master bus, which I keep at the very ends. Now this is the final step, and you already heard it with it on, the final step before the vocals. What I'm going to do is add some compression, and this also helps. So it's turned down to, it turns down -2.5 to ensure that I don't clip the master. So first thing I do is add some compression because the vocals are being sent here too. I want to make sure that we have enough room for everything. And notice how it's going even less than the instrument bus, because we still have to save room for vocals and make sure, because if it's going all the way to there, like we're compressing 12 decibels before even going to vocals. Now, not only would my heart jump out of my chest if it was past 8, but we have to plan because we're not done. This is so we can finalize, like these plugins are going to affect literally every track in the mix except the original mix and the original drum mix. And then we have the Pultec again. And remember what I said the bonding point was? Boost at 100 Hertz. So this is going to bring out 100 Hertz in the whole spectrum, as well as, so we have that on guitars and bass also. So the character of this EQ, and actually I'll take that off, the character alone will affect it also. And I have some a boost at 10K also to help brighten the whole thing. Now, everything is off. And that's just the sound of the state of the EQ. So already we're getting something. And now the bonding point at 100 Hertz, and then to make the whole thing brighter, let's see what that sounds like. So now, remember what I tried to do with the original mix, where I tried to do this to bring out the cymbals? Now that plugin is doing it. So we did it with the Pultec. Now this doesn't mean that I would put this plugin on there and do it, because there were much more problems in that version of the mix than could be fixed with just one plugin. So then some tape effects. And this one I've noticed brings out a lot of low ends, which is what I like about it, since I do much heavier music than this. And really the best way to hear it that I would advise you do is Waves has been having a sale for the past couple months because of the whole quarantine thing. So take this across any song or any track you finished. Duplicate the track like this, have it in one and not the other, and then flip phase on one of them, and you'll hear exactly what this adds. It's super subtle, and the way I found out that I liked this was I took labels off the mixes, and I just closed my eyes and listened to which one I liked better, and there was one that had a little bit more of low ends than the other one did, and that's the one I decided that I liked, and this was the one on it. It brought out a little bit of highs too. And then the last thing, which, I won't go over the last EQ yet because I waited to add vocals before I did that. So let's get into the vocals. And originally these were verse and verse double is what these were called. No, forgive me, I'm sorry. It was verse left and right. But if we listen to the takes, let's listen.
You broke me into pieces. Don't tell me what to be. You've given all your instructions. You need someone to believe in. You have all your...
So those are the vocals. And I liked that there was a plan for these, but they weren't performed as tightly as I would prefer for them to be a left and a right vocal, but they're performed well enough to be doubles. And what doubles are is basically you have a main vocal and then use the other one as a double and blend it in, and this slightly thickens it up. So let's listen.
You broke me into pieces. Don't tell me what to be. You've given all your instructions.
It's super, super subtle. It will sound like one voice in the mix, but you'll notice the similar characteristics shine through on these. And so what did I do for him?
You broke me into...
Okay, right there. You broke... The plosive right there. Do you hear it?
You broke me.
That I don't like. So I would have added a Nope, I added an EQ. Okay, yeah, that does make sense. Because I started with the Pro MB to try and stomp down on that. And it works, but then I looked at the spectrum and I'm like, why the heck am I doing that? Because that is really just, that area would be right around here or so. And I could put the high pass up here without it affecting the vocal at all. So it was smarter to just dump the frequencies here, ensure that wasn't in the recording, and then boost the highs a little bit just to kind of bring his voice out a bit.
Into pieces. Don't tell me what to be. You've given all your instructions.
And then this is a sort of a dynamic performance, as we can see, especially when we get right here. So we're going to need some extreme compression, and especially that has to be a plosive, right?
Pieces.
Yep.
Don't.
Okay, so did we see it right there? Watch this part of the graph.
You broke me into pieces. You broke me into pieces.
Did you see all of that rise up? That's the plosive. That's how they can damage things. So I put gain reduction on because it's a really aggressive compressor, and I didn't want his voice to be transient heavy, so I stayed away from CLA, CLA 76, and I liked what this character compressor put on it.
He says, don't tell me what to be. You've given all your instructions.
And then sibilance to act as a de-esser.
You need.
So that is what's being taken out, those three. Well, I shouldn't say taken out, I should say being reduced. And because we have the exact same vocalist on the entire song, I literally just copy and pasted every setting onto everything, and it was more of a fader bounce trick, except when it got to the outro. So the outro was a little different. He was the vocalist was really it sounded harsh on the mic. So let's listen.
Wow, that's in my hands. Wow, that's in my hands.
So this is the no effects.
Wow, that's in my hands. Wow, that's in my hands. Wow, that's in my hands.
So the reason I did the fade out here is because and this is why I didn't do a left and a right like these were titled, because the words end differently here. So this was a way for it to start off double, and then we would be focused on this one. And then even just hearing it, I don't have to point out that some start sooner. Just listen to it.
Wow, that's in my hands. Wow.
Right there.
Wow.
All right. But things like this are great for doubles to help thicken up the vocal. So I'm really glad these were here. So yeah, I put the same EQ, the same gain reduction, but it was still really harsh sounding.
Wow, that's in my hands.
Like, I don't know how to explain it since I do metal vocals and not this. And there's probably a frequency I could have removed with EQ or so. But it was just so piercing, not in the high ends, but just, I almost want to say too saturated, even though that's not quite the right word. So what I decided to do is put an effect on it, make it sound like a lo-fi effect. And I could have done it with gain reduction on both. Let's turn it on, the lo-fi. And see what that would have sounded like.
Wow, that's in my hands.
Yeah, but I didn't like that as much.
Wow, that's it.
So I used Saturn for it. And this is where I will break my rule of no presets, because I used it for this. This was a beautiful one that helped save me time.
Wow, that's in my hands. Wow, that's in my hands.
But it's still super, super harsh, if not, well, not more than before, but you can still hear the harshness in there. So now that all the vocals are isolated between 456 and hertz and 4K, just throw the Pro MB on there, and then that will soften everything up.
Wow, that's in my hands. Wow, that's in my hands. Wow, that's in
And we can see how high those are peaking. And I could have done this with the TDR Nova, but I wanted to use the Pro MB so I could adjust the attack and release times if necessary. Which, wait, does the Nova have attack and release? Oh, it does. Okay. Well, that's not a good excuse then. I guess I just wanted to use something different. So all right, and then as far as sends go, all these are going to a vocals bus. All of them, so this one right here. And then we have the final two for an effects going to a reverb bus. And then all of the vocals are going to reverb and delay buses. So on the vocals bus, we are just compressing. Let's take a listen.
hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands.
And then the last thing is a reverb and delay. Now, I use reverb to smooth out vocals and delay to add texture. And you're not supposed to hear that delay or reverb are there. You're not supposed to know. That's the overall goal. You want this to sound like reverb's job is to smooth it out. Delay's job is to add a subtle texture, kind of like the doubles did with each of these. So I'm using the stock reverb, as well as this is another free plugin. I think this is the fourth one. I believe it comes standard in Reaper, but you can download these on your own as well if you search Google for it. But the most important part of delay and reverb is the timing. You have, well, I'm actually going to say you have to. You have to time your reverbs and delays to the tempo of the song. Not a lot of people know this. All right, so this way it sounds like it has a purpose if it is heard. All right, so I did the research, and there's a resource called a Nick Fever Delay Calculator, which is a website you can go to, enter the tempo of your song in beats per minute, and it does the math for you for measures, quarter notes, triplets, dotted notes, everything you can think of. So through that website, I figured out that my reverb should be this, 1.65 seconds in length, and my delay should be 413.8 in milliseconds. So those sound like this.
I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. Yes, sir. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands.
And then once I got a good vocal balance with the instruments, that's when I blended in the reverb and delay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute these and unmute them. and I want you to hear the difference it makes in the vocals. The easiest difference to hear is that it'll make them brighter and a little bit louder. That's the main thing, but there's like just listen for the differences. Now, so if we look here, M is muted, and now they're going to be on. So let's listen with them on first.
It's meant to be. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel.
And the other thing is that when you pause the song and then you hear the reverb and delays, don't worry about that, because if you don't hear it in the song, don't worry about what happens when you pause it. That's okay. And then what I did in terms of frequency was I added this EQ, and this is where I used the spectrum graph.
I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands.
So this is what I used to find out frequencies that I wasn't focusing on, or that I just plain couldn't hear at this point in my audio journey. And it was these three in particular. So that cleaned it up. And then that was the overall balance of the song. And then a few other things is that since the sub is super saturated, during the break here, I actually took the sub out. Because if we listen to what the grit provides to that part, well, let's play everything then.
I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel all this.
And that's another good trick if you're unsure about your bass and guitar balance. Mute and unmute the bass, and then see if you can hear it.
I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your dis.
In which case, I definitely can. But what the sub added to the breakdown, it was too intense. Like, I ended up focusing on that instead of the guitar, which I believe was the goal. So let's listen.
I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your dis.
Versus if we take it out.
I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your dis.
You know, it's way too intense. And the other trade-off this provides is that when we go back into the final chorus, then you're going to get it sort of an enhancement slash enrichment of the mix, because it was missing here, and then because I panned the guitars left and right, you're going to hear the slides. And then the bass and the sub will kick in one final time, along with everything else. And then the final thing is automation. I didn't do a ton. I just did some stuff that I was hearing. So like right here, what is this? Okay, so the reverb and delay for the break. So it turns out for the rest of the song, with the instruments, the reverb and delays are not heard. but I automated it down because it was too present. Like, I still want the vocals to be thicker and more textured, but this was overkill for it because I was hearing it's like, oh, there's reverb and delay there. And that wasn't the goal, so I automated it down 10 decibels and then brought it back up for the final chorus.
I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my ass. I will not hold you up any longer.
So then you hear that the S in the delay kind of gets brought back up. And that's okay, because what we have at the same time are cymbals. So that covers it up. And then the final thing I did is I pulled down the reverb for the effect here. Well, let's mute the cymbals. Now, the reason I only did it with the reverb and not the delay was because I still wanted the texture of his voice to be there. You know, I did a lot of smoothing with the multiband, which is why I brought the reverb down, but I still wanted the texture of the delay to be there, so it wasn't too soft. And all in all, that is what I did for the mix. So let's listen to what it is. So, kind of comparing it to the original mix, the goal was to see if it was better, and we have definitely made improvements. Listening back on this, the one thing I noticed is that it sounds like he basically had the same guitar part in the verse. Let's listen.
And the pieces, don't tell me what to be.
Instead of this.
Know your instructions, you need someone to believe in. You have all your little distractions. I wear my heart on my sleeve.
But like, as a musician, I like the style change of switching to a different guitar part, and especially one that's not distorted. That way it provides a lot more impact when it goes to the chorus.
Have all your little distractions. I wear my heart on my sleeve. And all your petty distractions. Giving up is how it's meant to be. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster.
Yeah, I definitely hear that the bass is way too loud. That's really all I can focus on, and that the higher end texture of the guitars is just buried. Oh, I heard some delay there. Hang on.
I'm not giving up the world.
That's super cool. I kind of wish I would have done that. So if you can hear on your system, we have a special type of delay where when he says my hands, then it's centered, and then that specific part is repeated in the left speaker and then the right speaker. See if you can hear that. Yeah, that's super cool. That's something I wish I would have thought of. That really is. Yeah, good on you for whoever mixed this the first time.
I'm not your little puppet, and you're not holding the strings. Stand up, the man in question. He needs something to believe in. You are the wasted potential. You are the dirt on the sleeve. You were the biggest advantage, and I held on when you gave up on me. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands.
Okay, so in this bridge right here, listen how loud the bass is, because like the role of the bass needs to be to act as a bridge between the kick and the guitars, and that's one of the reason I split mine up specifically to let the low end of the guitars through, because it's never good if your guitars overtake your bass or if your bass overtakes your guitars. You want them to work together. And even hearing there that some of them were played off time, you know, that's a lot more evidence in the way that this was mixed. You know, like a little bit of balancing would go a long way there, because, like, yes, you do want everything to be heard, but also everything has its place. Like, everything has its place in relation to everything that's going on in the mix. So, like, there's a way to make the bass heard if you know what to listen for, and that's kind of a tougher thing to learn. So like if we listen to my version, you know, we can hear that I shaped the tone to sound a little different, but it is there, and that's evidence. Like, I made sure the listener knew that in the verse where you hear this.
He says, don't tell me what to be. You've given all your
So that's another reason I like the reverb guitars, is that you hear the bass and the kick at a different time. So the kick,
you broke me into
and the bass hits every other. So this way the listener goes into the song, well, I should say the rest of the song, understanding what the bass is supposed to sound like. So if you really listen to it, you'll be able to know what it sounds like. So let's finish listening to this one. It also sounds like the guitars may have been, if this was an attempt at a quantizing, the machine definitely messed you up, because it sounds like there's a timing issue on the guitars that they start sooner than they should on the second. See, the bass is in time with the drums, but the guitars are sounding a little sooner, is what I'm noticing. Oh, and then that's lower. That's something I didn't realize. And then kind of unrelated, I actually liked how these started at different times. It's kind of a cool glitch effect, in my opinion. And especially if you're listening to this on headphones, like, it's going to be really cool to hear those right and left and the bass still in the center. And in my opinion, it's a perfect opening for the break. Like, you couldn't have gone right back into the chorus after that. This was written and recorded beautifully for this part, and that's one thing I really like about it. Like, it's the perfect transition. So let's continue listening.
I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. Call me when you...
Yeah, and then the bass being as saturated as it is, it's overtaking the guitar, and that's one of the reasons I left the sub out, is because I didn't want that to happen. So let's keep listening.
I will never be the crutch you think I am. Call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands.
Okay, so I guess this vocal was added whenever a vocal re-recording happens. And the harmonics are in the newer one, and that's something I forgot to go over that I'll jump back to in just a second. But right here, I adjusted how this would end so many times because I wanted it to be perfect, to still hold its own even at the end of this track. So I'm gonna move this down real fast and let's see what what was there. I'm sorry. That's right, I forgot about that. So this sounds like it was recorded 2 different takes. One pan to the right, one pan to the left. That is perfect. That's exactly how you want to do it. You know, you don't want the same take on both the right and left, because then it becomes mono and not as interesting to listen to. So I'm going to put the mix in mono for a second. And let's listen to how each of these ends in their own way. Okay, a little bit of delay. How about this one? A sudden one, and it sounds like the delay was cut off. So then what I had to have done is I liked the delay. So yeah, I basically just dragged it down like that. Oh, and then I have it here too. You know, I remember having it there. I don't remember why. I think I put that aside in case this didn't work out, but it ended up just becoming a happy accident to where it Let's see, how loud is the bridge guitar? Or break, I'm sorry. So about the same volume, so it's adding a little subtle boost. And therefore you hear the delay tail off more often. Well, not more often, but you hear the delay tail off into complete silence, which reduces the need for automation within any of these two parts. And I should actually rename that to rhythm guitar lefts. All right, so let's listen to the new mix all the way through and make sure that there's nothing that I forgot. And let's see what the result is.
You need something to believe in. You are the wasted potential. You are the dirt on my sleeve. You were the biggest advantage, and I held on when you gave up on me. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world.
So one thing to notice is how much more cohesive the thing sounds, especially in the chorus, with how well the vocals fit in with both. Let's listen.
I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands. I'm not your little puppet, and you're not holding the strings. And of the man in question, he needs something to believe in. You are the wasted potential. You are the dirt on my sleeve. You were the biggest advantage, and I held on when you gave up on me. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my.
You know, one thing I said I was going to do that I forgot is I said I was going to take the rooms out and that we would listen to the effects that had. So let's do that. You know, I think it would be more effective to hear it without cymbals. Wait, these aren't the rooms, these are the reverbs. I apologize. Let's try it again. So it just adds an environment across it, which was the goal for that. So let's keep listening.
I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands. I will not hold you up any longer. I will never be the crutch you think I am. You can call me when you feel your disaster. I'm not giving up the world that's in my hands.
And that is the song. So this is the final mix. The master. So really not a lot going on. Oh, I forgot to, well, obviously I did, but we should go over it also, is to check to see what we're peaking at. Alright, so -16, and most likely that's the same with the It wasn't, I was wrong. Alright, so about -15, that's okay. Especially since our goal is -14. And so what I did with a fab filter is I said the lowest I would go was 35, so that's what I did. And then I just removed stuff that popped out of the frequency analyzer. So let's listen. Okay, so these three right here, we see those going down. So we can activate those. I'm curious what this is. What did I do here? Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So what that is, during the verse, I was still hearing some of the reverb I took out. So that's what that was. So let's listen.
You've given all your instructions. You need someone.
So that's strictly the reverb. And you can hear a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of vocals in there. But that's okay because we're not affecting the whole thing. And then let's listen to what's being removed. Yeah, that was a such a ridiculously subtle amount of sub. So out of curiosity, let's see what we can hear through this.
It's meant to be. I will not hold you up any longer.
It says we have some signal there, but I'm not hearing anything through my monitors. Okay, now I am. Now I am. And my monitors are at such a super low volume also. Well, I shouldn't say super low, but you know, I'll actually do a test on my see how many decibels my monitors are reading at. Alright, it's looking like an average of 65.6 decibels from my monitors to my ears. And I was hearing sub only at 30. That's not the right one. But only at around, well, let's do it again. Okay, right there I hear some. But yeah, nothing below that. And then these were just notching things that I didn't like.
You broke me into pieces. Don't tell me.
Oh, and then the final thing that I do for mastering is I make sure we peak at a certain level. So it was looking like between -3 and -5 is what our peak was. And that ensures I have enough headroom to bring up the track in the mastering stage. So that's what I did. I added a limiter, brought it up by, it looks like, just over 3 decibels. I have the threshold at -2. So any peak that goes past -2 on the scale, that's when the limiter will start to kick in, and with a ceiling of -1. And that's a safety net in case there are any random spots that go beyond the ceiling, which is possible if you push the limiter hard enough. Take my advice, don't do it. And then a release at 1 millisecond, because I don't want the mix to sound squashed by any way. I want it to be at a good volume. I want it to be balanced, and that's what I did in the mixing stage. And then mastering is making sure that everything still sits well and that everything works together and has its own space, in addition to sounding like a cohesive unit. Yep, it looks like that's what we did. We are not hitting the limiter hard at all at less than a decibel. And everything sounds good to me. So that's how I sent it to the client, and their response was positive. So I hope some of these lessons and some of the things I did will help you in your mixing and audio journey. And feel free to listen to the final mix along with other people who have mixed it through the link in the description. And I will see you guys next time.